First up, millions of Australian readers would have got a shock this morning when they picked up their Murdoch newspapers. Around the country, these papers were tucked inside a 16-page wraparound like this on global warming. 16 pages of News Corp's global warming propaganda telling them why Australia should cut its emissions now to net zero. Telling them that this will actually be good for us. And that is a shock, not just to me. Because as Kevin Rudd said, this is a big U-turn, especially, well, actually, I've got to say the former Labor Prime Minister was a bit ruder than that, but anyway, you look up his tweets, big U-turn. Because most of these same newspapers campaigned against Kevin Rudd's global warming policies and against Labor's later carbon tax and against Labor's global warming policies at the last election, and also mocked global warming extremes from Rudd to Greta Thunberg. And now this, a conversion, a campaign. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison will actually be delighted because he can now have the Malcolm Turnbull type policy that he wants, net zero emissions, and take it to the next big global warming conference in Glasgow in November, knowing that he has the backing of the Murdoch media. In fact, of all the mainstream media, the ABC as well. Everyone is on board now, including Labor, which, by the way, is gloating.
I welcome the campaign by News Limited that we've seen launched today as well, of heading towards zero by 2050. This is, as Labor has said the whole way along, an opportunity to create more jobs, to create more economic activity, particularly in regional Australia.
Everyone is on board, everyone who gets an invitation to the big house. Except I think you maybe should worry when big business, big media, big government, they all get into bed like this. Now, luckily I've been told by my bosses in News Corp that we still believe in debate here, unlike the ABC. That is what still makes us so special, even when we suddenly sound like the ABC on global warming. But I am still free to say exactly what I think, and that's the only reason I'm still here. So let me tell you what I do think about this 16-page supplement, the first of a 5-part campaign this week to persuade you that slashing our emissions, getting ourselves off coal is brilliant. In fact, it's going to make us money. Forget all that stuff we used to say that it would ruin us. This is what I think. It's rubbish. I don't buy it. Not the arguments here at any rate. In fact, I say again, if the evidence is so clear that the world is heating dangerously, if the evidence is so clear that we could and should stop this warming, you wouldn't need to tell untruths, right? But here, well, let me start with this story. This appeal to conservatives like me to get on board this campaign. Iron Lady saw the dangers. The great Margaret Thatcher, the great Conservative Prime Minister of Britain, and a chemist she is, or was. Even she warned the world it had to do something about global warming. And straight away I'm thinking, guys, who are you trying to fool here? Because Thatcher actually changed her mind. Later in her book, Statecraft, she said, the evidence actually wasn't that clear. And by the end of my time as Prime Minister, I became seriously concerned about the anti-capitalist arguments which the campaigners against global warming were deploying. She even mocked the campaign as hot air. And she said the Doomster's favourite subject today is climate change. Now, unfortunately, that is not the only thing in this supplement that isn't quite straight. Now, naturally, I asked myself, what is the evidence in these 16 pages that the world is heating dangerously, and because of humans? Well, it says, for instance, here. Well, it says the Great Barrier Reef coverage is half what it was in 1988. But that's not true. A study this year by the Australian Institute of Marine Science shows amazing recovery. We're also told there's more drought. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but even our top warmest scientist was taped admitting to other experts there's actually no evidence that our emissions directly cause drought.
As far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought.
We're also told there's a higher proportion of severe cyclones, when in fact, our Bureau of Meteorology figures, you can just look them up yourself on the internet, they show that while that might be true, overall we're actually getting fewer cyclones, including fewer severe cyclones. Why didn't they say that? We're told here that there's now more floods, when we used to be told instead that global warming meant the dams would never fill. Remember that? But the story shifted. But again, the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just this year actually admitted it had low confidence in actually seeing a trend in the magnitude of floods caused by humans. Now I could go through the rest of this. The storms figures, things like that, trickery in the figure for the temperature rise. It includes a lot of natural warming going back a couple of centuries and so on. But what good would it do me going through all this and picking out the obvious flaws? Who cares about the science when we're talking about a religion? And when this is a newspaper campaign, which means that any good that may in fact be caused by the small warming we have seen is not mentioned. The record crops that we're getting, for instance. Other things not mentioned either, the fact that we're now actually far less likely to die from a climate disaster. And the fact that Australia's emissions are so small, 1% of the world's total, that no cuts we make would make a difference to the temperature anyway, as the former chief scientist once admitted. He's in here too, 2 pages, but he doesn't mention that. 2 pages of Alan Finkel. Doesn't mention that little important figure. One country that could possibly make a tiny difference is the world's biggest emitter. China pumps out 28% of the world's emissions now. Now we're told in this supplement that, China is actually setting an example. It's getting the most energy from renewables. Well, it's a giant country, for a start, I'm not so surprised. But why doesn't this supplement mention that China is now suffering terrible blackouts, not enough electricity? And the Chinese premier last week ordered the country to burn more coal. He said, we must ensure the people's livelihood and heating energy in winter and ensure that the use of coal for power generation and heating. He said, promote coal mines. He sent out the order, promote the entry of all coal-fired power generation electricity. And why aren't we also told about Europe right now? An energy crisis there too. Britain, a shocking shortage of electricity. The wind has slowed right over Europe, so the wind farms aren't really generating the power all these countries expected. It's so bad that Britain has had to actually pay to reopen the coal-fired power stations it wanted to shut under its green policies. And all that could be our future. Now, I know that this supplement says, no, we could actually make a mozza, an absolute fortune from green energy. Billions. When in fact, coal right now is our second biggest export. Now, that's going to be hard to replace. No, but it says, look, we can do all sorts. Oh, hydrogen power. We could do hydrogen power, but that's not actually a proven source. We could actually build more solar plants or use more solar panels. Although, of course, we need to subsidise them or price out the coal competition. A lot of green carpetbaggers here, all shaking out their little tins. Money, please, money, please. You know, when Henry Ford was selling his cars, he didn't need the government to ban horses so he could get a leg up. He didn't need governments to set a quota for us to buy 1 Ford for every 5 horses. When Apple invented the iPhone, we didn't need the government to tax Blackberries to make us switch. The inventions spoke for themselves. Now, if all these green schemes that are supposed to be replacing our coal, if they make money, you won't need to force me or anyone else to use them or invest in them. I mean, just go to the market, sell it. Don't talk in the papers about how great you are and we've got to ban coal or whatever. But here's the thing. When I see all these brilliant schemes, future power sources, etc., look, Britain wouldn't now be short of power if these green alternatives all worked to plan. China wouldn't. Spain wouldn't. And I have a real problem putting faith on all these brilliant new ideas that are going to save us. You see, our coast right now is littered with the wrecks of wave generators that were going to power even coastal towns like Albany, and they flopped and sank. We had the geothermal power schemes that Tim Flannery, remember him? He said that'd be easy. It's a doddle, but they failed too. We have poured millions and millions into carbon capture schemes that still do not work as we need. These were all going to save us too. None of those failed schemes are mentioned in the 16-page wraparound to persuade you that the argument is over. Australia must get on board this new green economy. It'll be a cinch, make you lots of money. And you know what else is missing? The most important data of all. By how much will the world's temperature fall if we do all this? And how much would it cost? I know I've lost the argument. My whole company's against me. I know that. Against these huge players, all the big political parties, my own employer, all the media, big media outlets. What am I? I'm just someone on the sidelines. Someone just howling on the sidelines, but telling you the truth.